Rome, the empire that conquered most of the known world. They built giant roads, massive arenas, aqueducts, and somehow managed to collapse despite having literally everything. So, how did a small village in Italy become the most powerful civilization on Earth and then completely fall apart? Let's find out. Our story starts around 750 BC. Back then, Rome wasn't an empire, it wasn't even a city, it was basically a collection of huts sitting next to a river. Not exactly world domination material. According to legend, Rome was founded by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, who were raised by a wolf, which sounds less like history and more like someone desperately trying to make their hometown sound interesting. The story ends with Romulus killing Remus and naming the city after himself. A strong start for Roman politics. For the first few hundred years, Rome was pretty small. It was ruled by kings, then the Romans got tired of kings. One king became so unpopular they kicked him out, and then decided, maybe let's never do that again. So they created a republic, a government where elected officials made decisions, in theory. In practice, it often looked like rich people arguing in fancy clothes, but it worked surprisingly well. Then Rome started expanding, first into nearby towns, then neighbouring regions, and then all of Italy. Every victory brought more land, more money, more soldiers, more power, and, as every civilization eventually discovers, more problems. One of Rome's biggest rivals was Carthage, located in North Africa. The two powers fought a series of wars called the Punic Wars, which sounds far less dramatic than it actually was. These wars were brutal and featured one of history's greatest military commanders, Hannibal. The man looked at the Alps and said, let's take elephants over those, because apparently walking around was too easy. And somehow it worked. Hannibal marched elephants through snowy mountains and invaded Italy. The Romans were horrified. Imagine hearing, "Sir, the enemy is approaching. How many soldiers? About 50,000? Oh no. And elephants? What's an elephant?" Rome eventually won, and Carthage lost. Very badly. The Romans destroyed the city completely. Then Rome became the undisputed boss of the Mediterranean, and business was booming. The empire got richer, the armour got stronger, and the territory got bigger. The politicians got worse, a lot worse, because once huge amounts of money started flowing in, corruption exploded. Shocking, I know. Nobody saw that coming. Political violence became normal, generals started becoming celebrities, and one man rose above the rest: Julius Caesar. Caesar was brilliant, popular, ambitious, and absolutely not interested in staying in his lane. He conquered Gaul, which is basically modern-day France. He expanded Rome's territory, won massive victories, and became incredibly powerful. Too powerful, at least according to some of his senators. They worried Caesar wanted to become king, which Romans hated. Remember, they'd already had that phase and got rid of it. So in 44 BC, a group of senators assassinated him, in the Senate itself, stabbing him 23 times because apparently one stab wasn't getting the point across. The conspirators thought this would save the Republic. Instead, it launched Rome into chaos, again, because assassinating the most powerful man in the country turns out to be surprisingly destabilizing. Civil wars erupted, different factions fought for control. Eventually, one man came out on top: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, who later became Augustus, Rome's first emperor, even though he carefully avoided calling himself emperor because we all know how important branding is these days. Augustus transformed Rome. The empire entered a long period of stability, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which lasted around 200 years, more or less depending on how generous you're feeling. This was Rome at its peak. Roads stretched across continents, trade flourished, cities expanded, aqueducts delivered water, engineers built incredible structures, and Roman influence spread everywhere. If you lived in the Mediterranean, Rome was basically unavoidable, like adverts on YouTube. The Colosseum was built, huge arenas hosted gladiator fights, animal hunts, public spectacles, and occasionally things that made modern health and safety inspectors spontaneously combust. I'd like some entertainment. Would you like music? No. A play? No. A starving slave fighting a lion? Now we're talking. Rome was powerful, but success created new problems, because managing a gigantic empire is difficult. Who knew? The borders stretched thousands of miles, enemies constantly attacked, the army became expensive, and the government became complicated, and emperors started changing alarmingly fast. At one point, Rome had so many emperors being assassinated that the position felt less like a job and more like a cursed object. Some lasted years, some lasted months, some barely had enough time to update their LinkedIn. Meanwhile, inflation increased, taxes rose, economic problems grew, and political instability became normal again. Then came the 3rd century crisis, one of Rome's worst periods. Civil wars, economic collapse, foreign invasions, plagues, basically every disaster category firing at once. If Rome had a customer support line, it was getting overwhelmed. Some emperors managed to stabilize things, including Diocletian, who looked at the enormous empire and thought, "This is too much for me." A reasonable conclusion, about 300 years late. So he split administration between different rulers, which helped for a while. And then came Constantine, one of Rome's most important emperors. He embraced Christianity, founded a new capital, Constantinople, and shifted the centre of power eastward, a decision that would become very important later, because while the eastern half grew stronger, the western half struggled. A lot. Germanic tribes pushed into Roman territory, and the army increasingly relied on foreign recruits, all the while political instability continued and the economy weakened, and Rome's ability to respond kept shrinking. And then came the Huns, led by the terrifying Attila the Hun. The Huns charged into Europe, pushing other tribes toward Roman borders, which created even more pressure. Imagine your neighbour accidentally crashing through your fence because someone drove a tank through theirs. And things got worse, and worse, and worse. In 410 AD, Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths. People were stunned. Rome had seemed invincible for centuries. Seeing the city attacked was like finding out gravity had resigned. The Western Empire staggered on for several decades, but it was running on fumes. Finally, in 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was removed from power, a teenage emperor named Romulus Augustulus, which is almost comically fitting. The final emperor had the same first name as Rome's legendary founder. History loves symbolism. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire was gone, after centuries of dominance. Well, mostly gone, because the Eastern Roman Empire survived, centered on Constantinople for nearly another 1,000 years, longer than the Western Empire itself, which many people conveniently forget, but that's a whole other story. So why did Rome fall? Was it barbarian invasions, economic problems, political corruption, civil wars, weak leadership, military issues, overexpansion, disease? Yes, all of the above. Rome didn't collapse because of one giant disaster. It slowly accumulated problems for centuries, like a computer with 4,000 browser tabs open. Eventually, something was going to freeze. And yet, Rome never truly disappeared. Its laws influenced modern governments. Its language evolved into multiple modern languages. Its roads shaped Europe. Its architecture inspired buildings around the world. Even today, we're still borrowing Roman ideas, sometimes without even realizing it. So, the rise and fall of Rome contains a pretty useful lesson. Building something great is hard, but keeping it great is even harder. Because Rome conquered half the known world, built one of history's greatest civilizations, dominated for centuries, and then discovered the one enemy it couldn't defeat: Rome itself.